The Chicken Church. The Chicken Church is by far one of the strangest abandoned structures in the world. It was originally built in 1990 after Daniel Alamsjah dreamed that God told him to construct a church on a hill in which all the religions of the world could worship together in harmony. At first, Daniel did not take too much stock in the dream, but then on a trip into the Indonesian countryside, he witnessed the very same hill from his dream. Daniel purchased the land, he began construction on the Chicken Church, but eventually he ran out of money. Daniel was forced to abandon the church before it was ever completed. It was not for another 15 years until 2015 that interest was renewed in the Chicken Church thanks to news articles that showed up online featuring the weird structure. More and more tourists then began flocking to this place in Indonesia, and the money earned from these tourists allowed Daniel to go back to the Chicken Church and keep building. Unfortunately, the church has yet to be finished. Underneath the structure are at least 15 unfinished rooms, many of which have become sanctuaries for homeless people and drug addicts. The walls are littered with graffiti, the church is crumbling little by little into ruin, and even some bats have taken roost. It looks like even with tourist numbers going up, the church will probably never be finished. And as a side note, Daniel told news reports that the church is not actually based on a chicken, it's supposed to look like a dove. Michigan Central Station. Nothing symbolizes the tragic fall of Detroit quite like Michigan Central Station. This abandoned yet beautiful building shows just how far Detroit has fallen from its days of automotive glory. The Michigan Central Station was occupied and functional for 75 years. It was used to ship the people of Detroit off to war, to bring them home, to send them on vacation, and so much more. But for the last 30 years, Michigan Central Station has been home to nothing but vandals. Oh yeah, and some junkies and some homeless people. The sounds of laughter and joy have been replaced by the whir of cameras going off, the slow dripping of water leaking from the roof, and the hissing of spray paint. The station is abandoned, decrepit, and will likely be destroyed sometime in the future. This is exceptionally sad considering the station's history. It began its conception in 1908 and had its framework in place by December of 1912. Michigan Central Station was formally opened on January 4th, 1914 after a fire at the old transport depot in December of 1913 caused a premature opening. In today's money, the station set back the city of Detroit about $55 million, but nobody could have seen the fall of the industry just 40 years later. By the 1950s, rail depots all over the country were being abandoned because of the decline in business. Pieces of the station began being sold off in 1956. The waiting room was closed in 1967, and then many of the grand walnut benches were sold off at just $25 each. All the amenities vanished, and the entire building was eventually bankrupted and shut down. Abandoned mental asylum in the woods. Probably one of the strangest abandoned places you could find right now is located in the absolute middle of nowhere. I'm talking about an abandoned mental asylum in the woods that almost nobody knows about. First, you need to travel to New York State. Then you'll need to go about 25 miles north of Pomona. From there, you need to find a trail leading off into a spooky wood. You will then find yourself surrounded by trees on an old worn path with nobody else on it. Continue along this path and you will find a cemetery littered with hundreds of grave markers, most of which are not named. The grave markers only have numbers on them. But if you go even further, you will come upon the abandoned Letchworth Village, which was founded in 1911 as a state institution for the segregation of the epileptic and feeble-minded. In other words, it was founded as a home for the mentally insane. It's unclear exactly what happened to the mental asylum, but judging by the ridiculous number of gravestones, there were at least 900 burials from between 1917 and 1967. It's not clear what kind of horrors went on in this place or why it shut down, but I have a feeling that we may be better off not knowing. In fact, we should probably let the abandoned bones of this institute slowly be reclaimed by nature. Grossingers Resort. Grossingers Resort was once a luxurious getaway in the Catskills, frequented by the wealthiest members of society. This was back in the 1950s before airfare was cheap and easy. Rather than flying from New York to Miami, it was easier to take a luxurious summer vacation in the Catskills at one of the many prominent holiday resorts. Grossingers Resort was one of the best. It was situated in the hills of the small town of Liberty, and for decades, at least 150,000 visitors stayed at the resort every year. The facilities were state-of-the-art. It was the first resort ever in the United States to offer skiing throughout the year with artificial snow, and it was even the inspiration for the movie Dirty Dancing. All of this is made even more amazing by the fact that Grossingers Resort started as a small family business in 1917 created by Austrian immigrants. But all good things must come to an end. This fascinating place of luxury eventually fell into disrepair in 1972. Global travel was kicking up, airfare was down, and people could easily fly outside of New York. By 1986, the hotel was forced to close. Since then, it has become a literal ruin. But if you look close enough, you can still see the nostalgic pleasures of the 1950s. Of course, if you look even closer, you can probably spot a ghost or two as well. Specifically, the indoor swimming pools look like a great meeting place for the mortally challenged. Temple of Santiago. The Temple of Santiago is a church in the state of Chiapas, Mexico that was abandoned hundreds of years ago. However, it's been sitting underwater for the past 50 years, drowned and somewhat forgotten. This church has had an extremely rough life. As reported by the Daily Mail, the church was built in the middle of the 16th century in the year 1564 by a group of monks. Locals had at the time expected the population in the area around the church to flourish, but that never happened. Then a plague devastated the area and the temple was subsequently abandoned in the year 1773. For the next few hundred years, the temple remained a ghostly site in an otherwise barren landscape never really visited by anyone. Then in 1966, the area was flooded to create a reservoir for a nearby dam. It was not until 2002 that a drought caused water levels to drop so significantly that tourists could walk all the way to the church. It has since become wildly popular with foreign and domestic tourists, and even though the water levels have risen once more, there are now fishermen who take curious visitors by boat to see the remains of this strange and oddly captivating temple. Kilchen Castle. Kilchen Castle in Scotland is strangely mystifying. This is one of the most fascinating abandoned relics in the entire country. There is not much left of it anymore, but it was once a fabulous structure. The castle was originally built in 1450 by the first Lord of Glenorchy. It was a 5-story tower house complete with a courtyard and a giant outer wall. The castle went on to be extended through the following centuries. In 1681, the castle was transformed into a barracks capable of housing at least 200 troops. And then between 1750 and 1745, the castle was used as a government garrison, but Kilchen Castle was eventually abandoned in 1760 after it was struck by lightning and seriously damaged. The remains of the tower are still sitting upside down in the middle of the courtyard. What's even more interesting is that the castle was originally built on a small island in the middle of a lake, but then in 1817, the water level fell and connected the castle to the mainland. Today, the castle is in the care of Historic Scotland and is open to visitors, but it has never been restored and is still slowly crumbling into ruin. Closter Heiligen. Closter Heiligen is an ancient monastery in Germany that has been destroyed by fire on so many occasions that the general consensus is that God hates it. This building is located deep inside the Black Forest of Germany, and today it stands a strange and haunting ruin. According to historical reports, the first abbey was built on the site in 1192. It was a simple wooden construction, but over the next few centuries, the church grew and grew. Local donations helped the church to be upgraded, and it became quite the impressive structure. However, a fire destroyed the monastery in 1470. The church was restored, but in 1555, another fire destroyed it yet again. Repairs were made after that, and the church stayed alive. Then in 1804, the church was struck by lightning and was lit on fire for a third time. Nobody bothered repairing it this time, and the monastery was abandoned and left to rot. But even today, the ruins of the church still stand. It has been kept from bursting into flames a fourth time by historic preservationists. Monks and pilgrims do flock to the site, and it's become very popular with tourists. If you plan on visiting the Black Forest in Germany, I suggest in the autumn when the temperatures are moderate and the spooky atmosphere is at its spookiest. Aniva Rock Lighthouse. The Aniva Rock Lighthouse was built in 1939 by the Japanese. All these years later, it still stands on a piece of rock located slightly east of mainland Russia, right between the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk. The Russians had originally wanted the building for use as a penal colony, but instead the two nations managed to come to an agreement and split the island. As a result, a ring of lighthouses was built along the rocky coast to signal incoming ships and troop carriers. But after 50 years of sharing the island, the Russians pretty much stole it. This action caused 500,000 Japanese people to be evacuated back to the northern island of Hokkaido, and in 1951 the island was officially given to the Russians. But the Aniva Rock Lighthouse still remains all these years and conflicts later. It might be abandoned, but it's still there. It's also in one of the most rural and relatively unimportant places on Earth. The lighthouse is full of old equipment and diesel engines, and the only ones who visit it anymore are the seagulls. The Great Wall of China. A lot of people don't know that after 2,300 years of construction, the Great Wall of China was pretty much abandoned. Yes, it is still the longest wall on Earth, and yes, it was first constructed to prevent the Mongolians from invading the country, and also to protect the Silk Road trade in the 700s. This doesn't seem completely fair considering it was the Mongolians who started the Silk Road in the first place, but it is what it is. And in any case, the Great Wall really cemented the northernmost border of China. but the original structure is not actually what you see today. After all those years of building, the wall was pretty much abandoned. It was way too expensive to maintain and to guard, and so the dynasties that came after its construction either let it rot or actually ripped some sections of it apart to use for building supplies. In fact, the sections of the Great Wall that you see today were mostly constructed by the Ming Dynasty during the 1400s. This is because the Ming Dynasty construction workers used bricks and stone rather than just earth, and so their sections have survived much better. Most of the other sections decayed into nothingness after the abandonment or became completely unusable. In the Gobi Desert, miles and miles of the wall are completely buried in sand, and in other places the wall is completely taken over by forest. Only some spots are open to visitors, with the most popular section being near the city of Beijing. The most haunted house in Italy. Nothing is quite as strange as an abandoned haunted house, and there is no haunted house more haunted than the Villa dei Vici, also referred to as the Red House, located near Lake Como in Italy. The house was originally constructed as a mansion in the 19th century, however the house has been abandoned for decades and falling into complete degradation. So far as the local legend goes, there are still ghosts living in the villa and they play the piano on a nightly basis. The villa is completely surrounded by woods and totally isolated. It's not actually known when the manor was first abandoned, but many people believe it happened after the original owner of the house found his wife and daughter horribly murdered. The original owner of the house died soon after the event, which may or may not have happened, and then the house fell into disrepair. It remained abandoned until the 1920s when Aleister Crowley spent a few nights in the villa inspired by the supposed ghosts. It's been said that Mr. Crowley performed satanic rites and possibly even murdered someone within the Red House's walls. To this day, local Italians are nervous to go near the house, and to be quite frank, it's just a matter of time until someone comes along and demolishes the Villa dei Vici and erases its dark past. Which of these fascinating abandoned structures would you love to visit? Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching. Come back soon and don't forget to subscribe.